Today is March 12th, and today's quote is entitled, Krishna's Gifts. Krishna's gifts may come through suffering. They can reform us in a way that we further advance in devotional service. It's just that sometimes Krishna's gift wrapping can fool us. So the idea is that if everything in the world were perfect, because we have such a strong desire to enjoy, we may never come to spiritual life. But it's the suffering that pushes us. And we all know this. This is why we've become devotees, or those of you who are becoming devotees have looked at the world and asked the question, why the world isn't perfect? Why am I not always happy? Why is there suffering in the world? And we also know that through suffering we often learn our greatest lessons. Through suffering we become stronger. And suffering reminds us of Krishna's teachings. For example, we know in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna has described this world as a temporary place where pleasures begin and end, where life begins and ends. And that we should be aware of birth, old age, disease, and death. So sometimes we forget. So what does Krishna do? When we forget, he reminds us. How does he remind us? He creates a situation where there's some pain, either physical or emotional, or pain in a relationship, or pain due to attachment to something that we can't give up, or pain due to not having something we're hankering for. And when we experience the pain, then we're actually receiving Krishna's instructions, but in a real life experience. So sometimes we read Bhagavad Gita, and Krishna will say, Abrahma bhuvana loka punar avartino arjuna. From the highest planet down to the lowest is a place of suffering where repeated birth and death take place. So we read that, we understand it, and we say, yes, this is my impetus to go back to Godhead, or one of them, by understanding the temporary nature of the world and the nature of suffering that exists within the world. But then when that actual suffering comes to us, we don't like it, especially sometimes someone brings it to us and we don't like that person. But let's look at it this way. That person was bringing the same teaching of Krishna that you appreciate. They were just bringing it as a lesson in life, not as an instruction, not as a written text and paper, but the text and paper becoming alive. You could call it a life lesson as opposed to a word lesson. So they're bringing the same word lesson that Krishna has given, but they're giving it now in the form of life. And so when that person brings that lesson, sometimes we have very nasty things to say about them. So we'll bow down to Krishna, we'll bow down to Bhagavad Gita, and then when somebody brings us the same lesson, we don't bow down to them, but we call them some nasty names. That's actually hypocrisy. And if we understand that everything is a karmic reaction, and all karmic reactions are ultimately meant to edify us, to enlighten us, to instruct us, and bring us closer to Krishna, then there can be no enemies. There can be no one to hate, because all that's happening is everyone is just bringing us closer to Krishna. Because whenever we go through difficulty, whenever we suffer, it brings us closer to Krishna. We think of Krishna. Why am I suffering? Why is this happening? And it's nullifying that tendency to enjoy. So every time we suffer, we're chipping away a little bit more at that tendency to want to enjoy this world. So that person who brought us the suffering is actually pushing us closer to Krishna. And Krishna is using that person to push us closer to him. So in that way, everything is working to bring us closer to Krishna. And if we can just see it that way, then everything can be a positive experience. So it's a very important point, and a very necessary point to understand. Otherwise, when difficulties come, we'll start to blame Krishna. We won't understand why a loving God can allow this to happen. But really, we should hear Krishna saying, whatever I'm doing, everything I'm doing is just to help you come closer to me. Hare Krishna.